All right. Okay. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yes.
All right. Let's do a quick. I'm going to do it. Just go around real quick based on what I saw. I saw Idaho. Uh-oh. See, this isn't going to work. Can you guys all? Yeah. Can you guys make sure you put it all on your phones on mute? Okay. Yeah. That's better. Okay. So actually, I was going to say I didn't see Idaho, but we've got. So it looks like we've got Vancouver, Lacey, Infusion, Wasilla. I'm in Soldotna in Alaska, Montana. Did we miss anyone else? And
Wyoming's here.
sorry, who was that?
Wyoming's here.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't see you. Oh, you must be one of the Geneva Woods. Okay. All right, guys, we'll get going. We don't have a lot of other issues. There's only one other issue outside of my presentation or my thoughts that we're going to cover. I'm going to stick to my presentation for most of this and a Q&A. So let's get going. One of the things that, as I sort of go through the month, as I think I said last time, as I go through the month thinking about, the topics that I want to really talk about, one of the things that I do is I take into account some of the issues that I'm seeing around the company. And, if people from Idaho were on and from Boise were on, or I don't know if they are, but if they were on, we've been struggling with some issues right now. And it really is actually very relevant to the topic of this conversation, the topic of this presentation. Because to a great extent, what we've done in Idaho is try to create a situation where the various teams are counting on each other to do part of the function, and we're having some startup problems. And I think a lot of it actually, as we're uncovering, as we're peeling back the onion, as it turns out, a lot of it really is based on certain misconceptions that are tied to lack of communication. I just found out there was some assumption that was made that a client couldn't do something, but they actually can. And I don't even know how that miscommunication happened, but it actually is very, very relevant to what I wanted to discuss today. And so that's kind of the process that I go through during the month to try to figure out, what's relevant based on kind of the things that I'm seeing. And it just happens to be some of the things that I'm involved with. So, what I thought was interesting, I'm in the middle of reading a book. I spoke with the Vancouver team the other day about this. I'm in the middle of reading a book called Team of Teams by Stan McChrystal, the General Stan McChrystal. Very interesting book, and really, to a great extent, it's relevant, very relevant to what we're going through right now as a company in trying to bring various parts of the company, various groups together. So I thought, you know what, in the spirit of being in Soldotna, and Mike Tavoli doing a book report, I'll do a book report on this one because I do think it's very helpful to answer some of the challenges that we're going through, and really gives us a nice roadmap to sort of where my thoughts are as an organization, where we should go. The basic premise of the book is basically this. What Stan McChrystal, he was the head of Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, which is essentially the task force that oversees all of the special forces in the U.S. So the Navy SEALs, the Rangers, the Delta Force, they all work together. And this Joint Special Operations Task Force really tries to bring all of these various groups to work together towards one goal. And that's the role that he had as the head of the JSOC. So the basic premise of this book is, what if you could combine the adaptability, agility, and cohesion of a small team? So a small team of SEALs, for example. What if you could take that adaptability, but get it so that make it work with the power and resources of a huge organization? And what Stan McChrystal talks about is when he took over, when he joined in 2003 and took over, what he took over was incredibly powerful forces, incredibly competent, incredibly well trained, incredibly well equipped, way better trained, equipped, and prepared than the enemy that they were fighting in Iraq. This is after the initial part of the war had ended, what he calls the conventional part, and the unconventional part had started. But yet, in his opinion, the U.S. was losing the war. And so this created kind of a crisis environment inside the military to try to understand how that could be. How is it, as he says, we never lost a single firefight. Every single time there was actually a firefight, we won. But it didn't matter because we were losing the war. And so what he realized is that it wasn't enough to have the best teams, the best equipment, the best systems. He needed to create a whole different model for how these teams work together. And so that's what he started focusing on. And what he realized is that the only way that was going to happen is, and what really evolved into this concept of teams, was that if he could maintain this idea of smaller teams, but create connectivity between these teams so that they can actually work together as one huge sort of organism. So if you sort of translate that to business, what he talks about is the sort of the traditional organizational structure. A person at the top, departments, and then a very linear reporting structure where essentially information is gathered at the bottom of the organization. It's pushed up to the top of the organization. Then orders come from the top, or decisions are made at the top. What that works for big companies that sort of want to dominate a space, but it doesn't work for companies that need to compete in a fast-moving environment where the markets change, the competition changes, which is obviously the market that we're in. And actually, in reality, with the disruption that's happening across every industry, really what he's saying is that model just doesn't work. That model of decision-making doesn't work. The way to make it work, to try to create that level of cooperation between the various teams, is what he calls is laying out the shared consciousness. So this is what I refer to as the culture. He calls it culture and shared consciousness. Laying out those guidelines. So as I've talked before, the principles of the six senses, but enabling the organization, pushing the decision making instead of making the decision making limited to the top of the organization, allowing the decision making to be made at the team level. So that's at the very high level and very abstract level. That's what he's talking about. Now, it all sounds very abstract, and you go, okay, what does all this mean, and what does it mean to us? So that's what I'm gonna try to show you. So when I look at this, and I look at some of the issues we're having, and then I also look at the successes we're having, because we are having a lot of successes around this idea of enabling various teams to work together. And I'll give some very specific examples of that and how we're doing that. We're also falling short in some places, but for the most part, I think that's just growing pains. And I think it's some of the, like the problems that we're having in Idaho. Some of it has to do with the fact that there's different processes that we're trying to combine into one. And I think they're short-term in nature, because I do believe what we're doing is we're moving towards this goal. So why is this important to us? Why do we care? What problems are we trying to avoid? The first one is what I call the Dedeaux paradox. Rod Dedeaux was a absolutely legendary baseball coach at USC in the 70s. They won a lot of national championships. One of the best things, and if you talk to anyone who played for him, and one of my very closest friends played for him for many years, his favorite saying was, never make the same mistake once, right? So, the typical idea is don't make the same mistake twice. His idea was never make the same mistake once. If someone's already made that mistake, let's not make it again, right? So learn from their mistake. And so to me, this is one of the critical parts of us trying to integrate the various teams that we have to make sure that we're learning from each other's experiences, and we're actually incorporating each other's experiences into our processes and what we do. The second problem we're trying to avoid is what I call organizational disengagement. So that's when people at the lower levels of the organization feel like they don't really have any skin in the game. Decisions are being made for them. They're not really involved in anything other than their silo. They're coming in, showing up to work, doing their thing, and based on, they don't really understand why the decisions are being made. It's not really being explained to them. So they're not really engaged in the overall organization, in the goals. They're not buying into the culture, and they just basically don't feel like they're part of a bigger community. Information insularity. So essentially, it's kind of this, related to what I just said. It's when I'm not really involved with any decisions, so I don't really understand why decisions were made, right? So we all of a sudden decide to drop a particular product line. We decide to, change the pricing on OTCs. And people at the front lines don't understand why we did that, because they're not part of the overall picture, and they're the ones that are taking a beating from the clients, and so they feel like they don't feel like they're engaged in it because they weren't engaged in the decision making. Inability to scale the team. So one of the things that McChrystal talks about is, if you look at nature, and he gives a whole bunch of examples in different areas, where essentially once you get to about 100 people, the organization stops acting as one team. And that's really, it has to do with certain human nature around, wanting to know everyone that you sort of is on your team, feeling close to them. And once you get to about 100, you sort of are passing by people in the hall. You don't really know who they are. So this idea that to be able to scale a team up into a sort of a much bigger organization is extremely hard. So what we're trying to do is to maintain certain teams, various teams in the organization, but keep them small enough so people feel engaged, but at the same time have them work together so that we can actually work as one. Again, I know a lot of these are abstract concepts, and we'll get into specific examples. I talked about the cultural insularity, where you don't feel like you're part of the culture, you're not buying into it, you're not, you just have no connection. You feel no connection to the values that I could sit here on the soapbox, talk all day long. If someone in one of our offices is not feeling like they're part of this bigger organization and part of the decision making and understanding of why things are being done, and shut off from information, then they're not going to buy into the culture that we're trying to create. And then finally, decision paralysis. So that's where everyone's waiting for the decision from either the woman or the man. And I know this is a problem, because I know I'm a bottleneck on a bunch of things. I just had to deal with one today with Scott, with having to do with the lease in new lease in Montana, where I'm the bottleneck on that one. So I am rapidly, as I told the Vancouver team the other day, I'm rapidly trying to get myself fired from the various jobs that I have in the company and just get back to one job. And that's whether that's the general manager of Vancouver, whether that's the regional manager over at in Washington. I want to push the decision making away from myself and onto the team, onto this leadership that's on the call today. So that gets very frustrating for people. If people are waiting for me for a signature, if people are waiting for me for a decision on, a sign or something like that, a logo or whatever, or whether they can order new marketing material, that ends up paralyzing the organization and ends up really affecting morale. So that's why we're going after this model, kind of a different model. So if you look at Geneva Woods, I mean, this is where it starts to get really practical. And obviously for a lot of the people on the call, they don't have a sort of a perspective of the past. But I think for the Alaska team, I think this would make a lot of sense. So if you look at the far left, this is what Geneva Woods really looked like, right, in 2012. It was the classic sort of organizational structure. You had a head of marketing, head of finance, this, that, and really everyone sort of waiting for decisions to be made at the top. Huge amount of bottlenecks for the decision making. No feeling of empowerment, which sort of ended up grinding everything to a halt, right? What we did over the past couple of years was try to systematically get away from that model. So by introducing things like, trying to get a new culture into the place, trying to standardize the way we do things, and we're still not even close to being where we need to be there. I just yesterday found out about, I can't remember what it was. It had something to do with pharmacy billing, where we're doing something completely differently in Wasilla than we are in Anchorage. And now, we've sort of figured it out now that we're centralizing billing. But standardizing our policies and introducing Yammer. Now, you guys are going to hear a lot about Yammer on this call, because to me, I truly, truly believe, and I think most of you guys know this, truly believe it is not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but it goes a long way to creating a platform for communication and collaboration, if it's done right, to address a lot of these issues. Now, where do we go 2 years from now? Where I want to go with the company is actually transform us from where we are today to a whole totally different way of decision making. Now, it's incremental, And if you it's revolutionary if you compare it to where it would have been 4 years ago, but it's incremental from where we are. So what I want to get to is the point at which things like an instant online meeting becomes front of mind for this team, so that if there's a level of collaboration within the organization, and I'll give a couple of very specific examples on things that we're going through right now, where we can instantly use the tools to the people that are relevant to a certain decision making can immediately get on together, collaborate together, make decisions, and go forward, so that we're making decisions more quickly, we're more flexible in the organization, and we are more responsive to our clients. So what McChrystal talks about is, okay, so what's required? How do you do this? Or what is it at the very, very bottom base of it? What do you need to have in order to pull this off? Well, first of all, you need to have pretty serious and dedicated people. So what it requires is a level of effort, a level of focus on professional development, on personal development on the part of our leaders to actually take accountability for things like decision making, for things like getting their teams engaged in the overall process. So that takes, it takes having the right people on your team. These are, people that are very serious, not only about what we do, but about what we're trying to do. It requires trust and a common purpose. So you got to trust that the people that you're working with are going to do a good job. You got to trust the people that are that you're working with have the best interest of you, your team, and the company in mind. And you got to share that common purpose, right? What that feeds into is one of the topics that I talked about last month, which is emphasizing purpose over procedure. So one of the things that we found out in Alaska, especially in Anchorage, was when we put too much focus on procedure in our DME business, when we created these standalone teams of documentation, QA, client services, we lost track of our purpose. We forgot as an organization. Now, maybe each individual person didn't, but as a whole, we sort of forgot what we were there to do. What we started to focus on was that particular procedure, that particular process, as opposed to looking at the patient holistically. So what did we do? We blew it up, right? So what it really requires here to do this is actually courage on the part of the management team to say, you know what, I'm going to pull the plug. It's not going to kill us. We're going to make changes. If it doesn't work, we'll figure it out, but we know what we're doing is not the right thing. So what we did in Anchorage was we blew up that model that we had worked a lot. I mean, had put a ton of effort into creating, and we're in the middle of going towards this pod model where we've now created a team of teams to really care for the patient and put the patient in the middle. There's got to be a commitment to sharing information. There can't be people that feel like they gotta control information, hog information. I think probably that makes sense to a lot of you guys. Probably have seen that where and a lot of that is really cultural, right? If I feel like information gives me power and I'm going to exert that power, I'm not going to share that information. That kind of attitude doesn't work with this kind of a structure that we're trying to do. And then a strong connection between the teams. So that means that I know people that are on the other teams. I either work with them on something else, or I've met them, I've done a project with them. So there actually is a personal connection. So we're trying to do all of these things. We are trying to integrate our teams together, working together. We're trying to do a lot of things like central fill projects in the pharmacy, creating best practices with what Anne is doing in DME between Alaska and Washington. We're trying to get people from one office to another office. So I know Kristen is going to Anchorage from Wyoming in a couple of weeks to start to understand how we use workflow in QS1, and then be able to take that knowledge back to Wyoming to try to execute on that. So all of these are very conscious decisions as part of this idea of creating this team of teams. What this will allow us to do, the reason why we want to do this is, like I said, harness the power of our members, of the people on our team, and really blow up this notion that we are limited with physical or geographical locations. So if you think about a traditional organizational structure, without all the tools that we now have, without instant GoToMeeting, without instant messaging, without Yammer, you really were limited to the people that were in your office, right? I believe we still, as an organization, are somewhat in that frame of mind still. We still somewhat limit ourselves by who is sitting around us as a resource. And I'll talk about very specifically, for example, to the QS1 project in Vancouver. We want to be able to make quick, informed decisions. The way you do that is by harnessing the information that's in the organization, sharing it very quickly, and not have things that are becoming bottlenecks and where everyone's trying to go find out the information for themselves and trying to figure things out for themselves, and therefore it ends up impacting our decision making and slowing us down as an organization. We're trying to really discover talent within our organization. So if we create cross-platform teams that have projects that they're working on and sharing with other people, that will allow leaders to sort of come up through the organization, because people don't feel like they're stuck in their everyday what they do, right? So if we now create a project, for example, the QS1 implementation, and we create teams around that, then it gives the opportunity for some of the people who may not be able to shine in their normal job to be able to display just how good they are with their knowledge of QS1, with their understanding of best practices. So it's a way for us to help the talent rise from the bottom and for us to be able to see it. And then lastly, I mean, obviously, we're going to spread best practices. And lastly, I want to make people's lives more interesting. I mean, if people are doing the same thing every day, it's not going to be that interesting, right? And so by getting them engaged across the different projects, across what we're doing, it actually makes their job more interesting. And I think it'll eventually make them a better part of the team. So the question is, okay, how do we see each other? So, Mike, I apologize. This is the closest thing I could find on Microsoft's art thing. Didn't have an actual picture of you. But to me, this was a great example of, how do we see each other? So the question is, who is Mike Inman? And this is where it starts to get into kind of more practical examples. Mike Inman is, you can look at him as, you can say, well, he's part of the Washington team, right? We can cut it down one level smaller and say he's part of the Vancouver team. We can then go one level deeper, say he's part of the Vancouver pharmacy team. And all of those sort of are only relevant to the people in Washington or the people in Vancouver. But there's a whole other dimension, right? If you start to think about him as a very experienced member of the pharmacist team, or if you think of him as a member of our compliance committee, right? Or if you think of him in his role as the person responsible for best practices, standards, and performance improvement in the pharmacy, all of a sudden, using Mike, your view of who Mike is in the organization and the resource that he represents to the other pharmacies and to the other locations becomes a whole different thing, right? And so when I talk about blowing up limitations of the geographical office that you're on, this is what Yammer allows us to do, right? It allows us to now say, hey, we've got a pharmacy best practices and standards group or team. Mike Inman is part of that. Let's say Matt Keith is part of that. Ryan in Anchorage might be a part of that. And all of a sudden, that team becomes a resource that's available to the rest of the company to be able to leverage and be able to use. But if you think about it in the traditional sense, no one would think of that person outside of their physical office, right? So this is the way, from a very practical perspective, I think that it can impact us. Another example, who's Matt Brown? Now, I thought this was really actually pretty funny, because his Yammer avatar or whatever is actually a transformer. I think it's a transformer, right? So if you think about what Yammer does to Matt Brown, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call have no idea who Matt Brown is, but I thought it was a perfect example. So Matt Brown is part of the Alaska team. He's part of the Anchorage long-term care, what we call RX2 team. But more importantly, as it relates to the rest of the company, he is a pharmacy billing expert, he is a QS1 expert, and he's a pharmacy tech, right? So if we start to look at him that way as a resource, all of a sudden we start to realize, wait a minute, we have a lot of people like this. So actually, one of the things I was wondering about, and I don't know if Matt Keith is on or Troy and Gann, I mean, just between you two guys alone, how many what you would call expert QS1 users do you think you guys have on your two teams? Troy, I think, I don't know if Troy's on, but RX2, how many do we have that you would consider big experts on in QS1?
If I had to answer for, oh, he's here. Never mind.
No, go ahead, Gen.
I would say that at RX2 we probably have 3 or 4.
Okay.
In Wasilla, I have 1.
Troy, what would you say?
Isn't in this call, but this is Chad. I'm here. I can tell you from experience working in the retail pharmacy that I've been learning from technicians, Emily Howlett, Matt Brown, and Ryan, one of the pharmacists in MedSet, is going to help us implement our workflow in a couple weeks here.
Right.
So at least 3.
I'm going to say there's at least 10. I can start to name them, right? I mean, whether it's Ryan, whether it's Dusty, whether it's Matt Brown, whether it's Utana. I mean, there's 5 right there at RX2, 5 experts right there. So, and I guarantee you there's probably 5 more, right? So my point is, and if you look at Wyoming, right, we've probably got, I don't know, Scott, what do you think? 5 to 10?
5, yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, 5.
So we've got about 10 or 15, and we're talking very, very high levels of knowledge, right? So what really got me thinking about this was, Reed, the other day when you sent that email about, hey, here's some concerns that we have, right? And you sent it to me, to Matt Keith, and to a couple other people. It really, these are some of the questions that we have about QS1 as Vancouver is looking at converting to QS1. What really hit me was these questions. We've got people in-house that are dealing with these issues every single day, right? The Vancouver pharmacy is very similar in at least, the type of clients that Vancouver has to Wyoming. So my point is, it's still, in my view, not front of mind for us to think of this organization and to think of something like expertise in QS1 as a resource, internal resource that we can leverage in making life easier for ourselves relative to, for example, something like the conversion, right? So practically, what does this mean? Practically, it means that we could have a QS1 experts group on Yammer that becomes a shared resource to the organization as the organization looks at a huge project such as the conversion in Vancouver. And the reason why Yammer becomes a useful tool in that is, number one, it breaks down the barriers with physical offices. Number two, it breaks down the barriers around who you really are and what you do in that organization. Whether you're a pharmacist, whether you're a tech, whether you're a client services person in that organization, it really doesn't matter, right? You're a part of this group, this QS1 expert group. You now feel like you're part of a team that's contributing to something bigger, which is the level of standardization we're trying to achieve across the company, the big conversion in Vancouver. So you're now more engaged. And what Yammer allows us to do is to actually have conversations. And there's a record of that conversation that you can go back to. People can chip in, and very quickly consensus can be reached around particular issues. So, Reed, I don't remember the exact, the questions that you posted, all the questions that you posted, but I think to me that's a perfect example that it's, if we started to think of ourselves beyond just that, our immediate surroundings, beyond just like the Vancouver team, and we started to think about ourselves as this organization that's got various levels of expertise around it, and therefore a virtual team can be created and tapped, then we really end up making our processes more efficient, making the projects more successful, avoiding a lot of the mistakes that have been previously made. And we rely less on our vendors, who may or may not come through for us because at the end of the day, they don't have that much at stake, and more on ourselves as an organization. So in the old world, if you think about it, a question about what can we do? Can we do this with QS1? In the old world, it would have been, hey, I'm going to send an email to my QS1 rep. I'm going to call the QS1 desk to try to understand this. I'm going to wait for a trainer to come by. But we don't have to do that, right? We've got the resources internally to be able to do that. And I guarantee you, I would be very, very surprised if there's functions in QS1 or processes in QS1 where someone in this company doesn't have the answer of what's the best way to do that. So what I'm asking is for the organization to start thinking about things. Another example is GoToMeeting, right? So GoToMeeting, if you think about GoToMeeting, I often, when I first started, people would always say like, I don't know how to do this and I'm waiting for someone to call me back. And I would say, well, wait a minute, just hop on GoToMeeting, show them your screen, tell them where you're stuck exactly in Brightree, for example, right? Show them exactly where you're stuck. And then they can see your screen and they can actually show it to you. What I find is that's still not front of mind to us as a team, right? As an organization, people still are sort of saying, sending an email, waiting for something to be, for someone to get back to them. Whereas you could very quickly, in 5 minutes, if you had our QS1, our Brightree expert panel on Yammer, you could very quickly post a note that says, "Can I get 3 volunteers to hop on a 5-minute call with me on a GoToMeeting in half an hour at the top of the hour, so I can show them this part of the process that I'm stuck on." Right now, if you guys look at the other parts of the organization, if you look at the way Alaska has evolved around Yammer, I think what you see is that actually Alaska has done a pretty good job. Even though we're still not there totally, Alaska has done a pretty good job of doing that. And I'll skip through because I wanted to show an example. I just pulled this off last night from something yesterday. And there was a couple of things that were very interesting to me about this. So number one, if you look at the screen, so this is a group, HME Complex Billing Questions and Best Practices Discussion Forum. I remember we started this, I think this was one of the first groups that we started in Yammer when we first brought Yammer on board. So number one, that to me is very interesting. So what we've got is we've created a platform for our experts to be able to chime in on particular questions having to do with complex billing questions and best practices. So Jennifer Folk puts up a topic, a question that she has. She tags very specific people that she feels in her organization are need to respond to this. What I found very interesting is, and then there's obviously older replies, but what I found very interesting is just looking at this screenshot. If you look at this, I mean, you look at truly how the world has changed, right? So you've got then someone in Wasilla, Alaska posting this, Mary McNulty from her iPhone in Anchorage, giving a response, and then Tara from a whole totally different department. So Mary McNulty from the Anchorage HME, Tara from the billing group in Anchorage from her iPhone, clarifying. So think about what this does for us as an organization and just go back 5 years, right? I mean, as Dick and I were talking yesterday, shoot, I remember I was in college. I had a job as a courier delivering stuff when the fax machine came out. And literally one of my routes was I would have to go to a title company, pick up a bunch of documents, drive it over to the FedEx office because FedEx had introduced fax, drive it over to the FedEx office because they had this thing called a fax machine. They would fax it and I would take those documents back and deliver them back to the title company. So if I look at just my lifetime, what has happened in our ability to collaborate as people and as an organization, it's truly mind blowing. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting about this, not only the fact that it was, iPhone, and not only, the time of the day. I mean, I think I was looking at this, I think it was around midnight Alaska time last night when I was looking at this. So this would have been around 8 or 9 o'clock when these guys actually commented, I think, if I remember correctly. But to me, it's this idea that it no longer matters where I'm at. Am I in the office? Am I in front of my computer? It really doesn't matter, right? Lisa and I gave, we were on this panel last week at the base here in Anchorage with very high level military personnel that are retiring, and one of them talked about well, can you guys talk about work-life balance? And what I said is, look, the concept of work-life balance really has changed, right? I mean, it's no longer this idea that it's the day is 9 to 5, or or it's Monday through Friday. The world really has changed now. To a certain extent, you gotta think about the legal issues and the HR issues, and all that stuff that's involved. But if you think about the level of collaboration that technology is allowing us to have in the organization, this is, to me, is a perfect example of that. People in different departments, different locations, different ways of accessing Yammer are collaborating with each other to very quickly come up with an answer to a question. This is what I want to create around the whole company, and I hope that makes sense. I'm sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and I'll stop in a second and allow you guys to talk. And because I'd really love to, one of the things I'd really love to do, hear from some of the people, where we have actually done some of this work, to see how it's impacted their lives. So, are we a team of teams? As I said, I think partially, yes. I mean, we're doing a lot of inter-office collaborations. We've created, Ann Meinhardt, we created a new position for her, where she is now essentially the glue for best practices between the various parts of the organization that are in the HME business, so that we can actually now start to collaborate much more closely, perform to the best of our abilities across the entire organization, and standardize the way we do things. So she is now doing calls with Lacey and with Sharon's team on the billing side on the HME, and taking some of those ideas, bringing it back to Alaska, and vice versa, and taking the Alaska ideas back to Washington. We've done this with IT, where we've created an IT team. So Ed, Nick, all these guys are part of Jason's team in IT. They work as one team, but they're also part of their local team, right? So Nick is part of the Wyoming and Montana organization, but he is also part of the IT team. So we're now creating a lot of standardization because we're able to do these things. We're creating a lot of standardization. We've done this with pharmacy purchasing. We've done this with performance improvement by creating these very specific tasks that are shared resources. As we're moving towards central fill, first it was with Anchorage and Wasilla. Soon it's going to be between Montana's cycles getting filled out of Anchorage. Then it'll be today we're doing Boise out of Vancouver. Soon we'll be doing some of the cycles from Wyoming in Vancouver. Doing all of these things allows our team to have to work together. So we're kind of forcing that a little bit. We've already in Alaska created these teams within teams. So we've created a team called Signature Services, where they're part of the HME team, but they're their own team. And they've got a very specific mission around our very high value complex clients. They're taking care of them, but they're working with various parts. Same with the discharge team, same with the rapid response teams. These are teams that we've created around very specific needs of the business, but they're all operating within a larger team. So we're doing a lot of this stuff. Talked about Yammer, but I think the part that I still would like to see, and I don't know if people agree or disagree, I want this to become front of mind, and I don't think it is still. I still don't think it is. I think we still tend to fall back, just because it's human nature, fall back in what's around us, what we already know. I'm going to just call someone at QS1, wait for them to answer my question, and or send them an email and wait for them to answer a question. So I think to a certain extent we're sort of there, but we've got some ways to go. I talked about most of this stuff. We don't need to do this, but I mean, these are some practical examples, right? If you look at the QS1 conversion, I would bet we've got at least 25 QS1 power users in the company. One of the things that I find interesting, a very specific example, I think if you look at Lena, who came to our team from SureCare in Vancouver, we have sort of mentally put her in the box of, well, she's part of the billing team, but she's a expert QS1 user, right? So it really becomes a way of how do we see people? If we see Lena only in the light of, or only through the prism of, she's part of the billing team, now we don't think of her as a resource, as a strong resource for the rest of the company around QS1 best practices, right? So it's really, to a great extent, just the way we look at it and the frame of mind that we're in. Our HME leaders, they've got their challenges. We know they do, right? They've got very specific challenges around dealing with clients and the documentation and the expectations of the referral sources. They can be a group. They can be their own team. I know we've got a PIC group in Yammer. I didn't look at it last night. I don't know how active it is. My guess is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Matt Keith is on the call or any of the PICs are on the call. My guess is it's not that active, right? But I guarantee you our PICs across the company are having similar challenges. And yet, if we don't allow them to work together in a collaborative manner, they're going to do things their way. They're not going to feel engaged as being part of it. They're going to feel like the weight is only on their shoulders, and we're not leveraging the know-how that is embedded in the organization well enough. We've done this with complex rehab to a certain extent. So now we've got a bi-weekly call with the complex rehab teams of Washington and Alaska, where every other Friday we get on the phone as one team, right? Even though until a couple of weeks ago they hadn't even met each other, but as one team, and talk about best practices on what they're doing and what we're doing. But I think still, I don't think we've taken it to the next level and truly created a group on Yammer, for example, where they can on a daily basis do this. My guess is we're only doing this on the biweekly calls, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we are. There is good interaction between the teams. But these are some very specific examples of how Yammer can help us in the organization. So what do I ask? I guess the main thing is this kind of transformation, this kind of empowerment, this kind of engagement. I can kickstart it, but it's up to you guys, right? So it ends with the people on this call. It really, as I said, I'm trying to remove myself out of the in the middle of this. I don't want to be a bottleneck to this stuff. So, but it really takes a sense of ownership on the part of the leaders on this call to be able to create this kind of an organization where power is decentralized, decision making is decentralized, information flow is smooth within the organization. And we've got tools, a lot of tools to do that. I don't allow, especially with new team members, especially when people join us, especially whether it's through an acquisition that we've done or someone that just joins our team. We cannot allow this level of isolation to set in, right? So we can't allow that new person to feel like they're a part of this, they're part of this small group of the 2 or 3 people that sit around them. One of the things I love seeing, I really, really do, when I see new people and their reaction when they get on Yammer and what they do and how much and their enthusiasm, I get so fired up when I see that. And I look at that as an example that where I know the platform works. I just don't want to have them fall back into sort of this traditional way of looking at who we are. So keeping them engaged is really, really critical. And then, you guys, it's up to you guys to identify. I mean, I sort of, if you just look at sort of what Yammer does for me personally, because of my travel schedule, because of what I do and where I'm at, what it does for me in allowing to be able to make quick decisions and give you quick feedback on things. One example of that is the other day, when Washington was talking about creating some groups, and then there was some conversations around, well, can't you just call or whatever? It allows me to have an instant view into the organization and be able to make real-time comments, whereas that never would have been possible 3 years ago. I would never have known what's going on. So it allows me to do this, and I think it will do the same for everyone on this call. So that's really my ask. My ask is for the sense of ownership on the people on this call. The buy-in that's required has to happen with the people on this call, and really sort of force that distributed control system that I'm talking about. I think that's it. So I'll open it up if anyone has any comments, questions to any of these ideas. I'd love to hear. Like I said, we've done some of this stuff, and or any of you guys that are involved in this. I'd love to hear your thoughts around how it's working, where it's effective, and where it's not, and how we do what we need to do in order to make it more effective.
Hey Dan, this is Gan. I can tell you this last week I had challenges when somebody went in and changed a whole bunch of my custom reports in QS1, and I was able to do exactly this with several people at RX2, and even though one wasn't able to completely help me, they were able to get another individual in it, fast, so that we could get the reports rebuilt. And it was just, you learn as you go. What you don't know is what's frustrating for me. And it was the difference of a simple thing like an and or an or, but by getting a second individual to take a look at it, they instantly saw it, whereas the other person and myself didn't. and it was fixed in seconds in comparison to spending, 2 hours waiting for QS1 to get on the phone and talk to a person.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
This is Dick. Folks, I think a big part of this is internalizing it. The tool, you've got to convince yourself that the tool is helping you do your job, and therefore your team is able to do their job better. Unless you can do that, you're not going to, and so then take a step beyond the tool and look back at what we're trying to accomplish. And so if we're trying to accomplish collaboration and we're trying to avoid the concept of the resident expert isn't limited to who's in our building. The resident expert is within the Geneva Woods family, and that raises our level of expertise tremendously.
Hey, Dick,
what's the best way to interact with them? What's the best way to tie them in? But if you can't come to the conclusion, if you can't figure out how this saves you or your team time and makes you more efficient, you're not going to use it. So you've got to internalize this and convince. And then my comment is, success begets success. Small steps. Find one way that the tool works. Let your team enjoy some success. You'll start to use the tool more. You'll start to expand it. We can't climb this. We're not going to jump to the top of Mount Everest. We're going to climb this mountain one step at a time. So that's my input.
Hey, Dick, can you talk about? I don't know if I assume Gabrielle's not on, or can you talk about, give the example, or talk about the example of the discharge team that we've created? The fact that that's a team that's got a member of the GoTech team on it, and tell me how that has worked. I mean, that's been probably now a month or maybe a couple of months since we've created that. Let's talk about how that has worked. Where has it fallen short? Because that to me is like a perfect example of this, where we had a business problem. We were not being flexible enough with our discharges. We were not being responsive enough with our discharges. So we essentially created both a physical team and then connected them to the bigger team through the use of Yammer. So how has that worked? Or if anyone else that's on that team that's on the call can comment on that.
Sure thing. And Ann, jump in, Jamie, jump in at any point as we're talking through it. But what we were finding is we receive prescriptions for discharge. We receive them at 501. That's our Anchorage office. And then they would be for, and we had personnel that were located at the Providence Hospital and who would attempt to handle some of those discharges, the paperwork. Some of it would be handled at our Anchorage office. Then we would attempt to dispatch from the Anchorage office, relay the information that we needed a walker or a concentrator to go wherever it needed to go. We'd relay that to the Anchorage office, to our logistics team, and then we'd attempt to deliver that product. What we realized is we had too many handoffs and we were having service failures. And so we consolidated the process so that all of our discharges, and if we have overflow, it reverts back to our Anchorage office, but that all of our discharges would run through that coordinator team that was physically located at Providence. Now with that, though, we still get orders here at the Anchorage office. And so the team had already created a discharge Yammer group. And so when we receive one, it's posted on Yammer. Again, the office locations are, I'm making it up, 4 miles away, but it's posted on Yammer so the folks at Providence know, holy cow, we've got an order. We've got something to be looking for. They then process the order, but we still realized we had a challenge in getting the order dispatched and then delivered. And so we moved our GoTech physically. We moved our GoTech from the Anchorage location to reside at Providence with the coordinators, so that then that level of coordination has taken place right next to each other. And our belief is, that the result has been we've increased our level of service. We're still working through hiccups. We will continue to do that, but we've increased our level of service, and then therefore been able to serve the patients, which is, and get them out of the hospital, which is the whole purpose of having the discharge team in the first place. And
does that revert to literally don't know the answer to this. Does then the overflow on the GoTech side revert to the rapid response team if they're if if uh, if they're busy or if they're in the middle of something?
It does.
So
And the overflow on the coordinator side reverts back to the Anchorage office if there are an excess number of discharges.
right, okay. So I think I really believe if you look at this, this is sort of it's not revolutionary per se, but the only reason why we're able to do this is because we've combined a variety of things. We've taken different people from different parts of the team and put them on one team together. We've connected them to the bigger organization, to the bigger, either in the case of coordinators or in the case of GoTex, to the bigger teams that are supporting them using Yammer and using the various tools that we have in a way that will allow us to deal with this particular client, which is a very large client, huge, obviously, level of responsibility, and a huge amount of complexity around documentation and things like that, and be more responsive to this client. So there are examples of this kind of stuff that we are doing across the organization. I mean, like I said, Mike Inman to me is an example of when we took Mike Inman, we've organizationally, we've taken him out of the, he's not part of the reporting structure of the Vancouver team. He reports up to Matt Keith, but physically he's there. But really his job is to be a resource to all of our pharmacies around best practices. And what we've also done then is made him part of our national compliance committee, which Dick is also on, and Scott Sulik is on, and Renee is on. So now what they're able to do is that team is able to define very specific compliance standards and best practices that we'd like to see across our pharmacies. And then Mike being in Washington and being part of the overall Washington team, physically being there, he is now able to help actually execute on that, right? So none of this stuff to me is really sort of really revolutionary. But the only way you're able to do it is by combining strategy with the tools that we have in place. And so if we can look beyond those big buckets, I guess that's what I'm encouraging people to do. And I don't know if there's any other comments on that, but if we can do this, we can really become a more powerful company, right? We can avoid mistakes. We can make quicker decisions. We can standardize. We can leverage our assets and our resources across the organization much better. People can either physically go help other people in various offices during times of crisis or times of major projects that we're in the middle of, or be able to virtually be available to them to help them. Any other thoughts or comments from anyone where you see this working, or where you don't see it working, or where you see opportunities for it to work?
Dan, this is Chad again. I liked what you said about decision-making being made at the team level, and I'll give you an example. When I was in the infusion pharmacy for a few weeks, a couple months back, I really liked how they had a morning rounding where everybody got together and discussed the patients that we were going to care for that day. And I liked the idea so much that I began doing something similar in the retail pharmacy. The retail pharmacy is a different environment. We don't need to discuss patients every single day as a group, but what we do is every week we get together and we have a meeting and we talk about what projects we're working on in the pharmacy. And what I've seen happen is our technicians have buy-in to our decisions now. They feel a part of the decisions that we're making, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. When I first started these meetings, I said, this is your pharmacy, and you are the ones who are helping. We're together making decisions on how we run it. And so I've seen success with this strategy, and I just wanted to reflect on your comments about decision-making at a team level, including everyone in the game so we all buy into it and all put the effort in.
Yeah. One of the things, it's interesting, you said that about what Infusion does, and that's a process that I think Matt Keith originally started a couple of years back on the daily rounds meetings. It's very interesting. So in the book, McChrystal talks about one of the biggest challenges they had because they were facing this enemy that was just moving so fast and changing so fast. They literally, the traditional way of the military processing information and intelligence was just useless because he says, these guys, these like SEALs would go on these missions. They would go grab a whole bunch of computers and hard drives and stuff like that, throw them in a trash bag, seal the trash bag, put in a helicopter, and send it over to Baghdad. Baghdad would then send it over to somewhere else. By the time anyone had a chance to look at it and actually analyze the information, it was useless because people had moved. They had already, the other side had already text messaged to get out of there and change their location, things like that. So what he actually started a daily conference call. And part of this is he was doing it with brute force because they had no other tools at that time to really bring people together. They had to do it with a conference call. So it's very interesting. He talks about how they started a conference call. It started with 50 people between Fort Bragg and Baghdad. So they started with 50 people every day, 90-minute conference call to be able to process intelligence in a holistic way, real time, right? And be able to make decisions real time while they were on the call so that they break down this idea that the bureaucracy that existed. By the time a year into this, by the time they were in the middle of that 2005, 2006 timeframe when it was really, it gotten really ugly there was every single day, there was I went back and checked the numbers, 7,000 people every day on this conference call. So 7,000 people would log into this video conferencing. McChrystal would lead it. They would talk about all the things that they knew, and they would make decisions on the spot. Now, obviously, what that requires is extremely strong leadership, extremely tight and disciplined approach to that. But they had to do it through sheer force of, and obviously they have a sense of urgency that we don't have. I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, they're dealing with life and death and in real-time decision-making and all this other stuff that we don't necessarily have the same need for that kind of communication. But it, to me, just sort of crystallized this idea that that they had to be able to share information, and they couldn't do it any other way other than we have these other platforms. So I think it's a reminder of like what the team does inside the infusion pharmacy and being able to share that information across the pharmacy every day. Anything else from anyone? Any other thoughts or comments? I think as far as the challenge for that Vancouver is going to go through, I think Reed, Mike, all of us, Matt, we really need to think through this QS1 conversion and how we're going to do this and how we're going to really leverage the organization in a way that will make this make it a big success. Because just talking to QS1 and their resource availability and things like that, I don't think, and we've learned this the hard way. I mean, we internally have learned this the hard way. We just learned it the hard way in Montana. I mean, even when I look at that small conversion in Montana, I don't believe that we really leveraged our resources the way we could have, right? We went in, we flew people in, we flew Matt Brown in, and for a week he was there, left, and all of a sudden we left that group by themselves, right? And we didn't leverage the resources and the platform that we had in place to do this right. So I think we've got to get into that frame of mind, and the leadership has got to really drive that, which will bring a level of engagement on the part of the team that will be very, very helpful. Any questions? I know it is kind of esoteric. It's conceptual, but does anyone have any questions or any disagreements? And I'm especially interested in where we're failing. Where are we failing? Where a different way of thinking would help us? Any comments from anyone? Doesn't have to be, but don't feel pressure.
This is Scott from Wyoming. I think we've started obviously here a new program with the med sets that's just completely foreign to our staff. We struggled mightily with it at first, and I think if we would have got a Yammer group together with Alaska when we started, we could have avoided a lot of the pitfalls that we've encountered. So I think of moving forward, I think I think as other places and we grow to start the home care stuff and the med sets, I think that's one group that I would suggest that we start. Get the marketing people involved in that as well.
Yeah.
On ideas on how to grow that.
Yeah. Part of what's interesting is, Yammer has actually a certified community leader program where you can actually become certified. So I don't know. One of the things I was going to do is actually work with our HR team to create some pockets of expertise, in terms of the community. I know what a lot of people are going to say as well. You don't have time, right? You don't have time to do this. But I think if you look at the way Alaska, and the reason I talk about Alaska is simply because Alaska has been doing this the longest, and there was actually a very strong buy-in on the part of Anchorage team, especially the DME team, because we were in the middle of such a huge challenge and such a huge shift in the way we were doing business, that it was almost like they were reaching for anything, and they reached, and when Yammer was provided to them, they reached for it, and it worked for them. But if you look at the level of engagement that takes place, I really can't accept this idea that, well, people don't have time because they got to do their thing. Because doing their thing, you got to think of this as part of doing their thing, right? This is part of the day. And if you look at that level of interaction that goes on, the level of the efficiency that it creates in of itself around being able to make quick decisions around providing a certain level of care or doing something for a particular client, it's creating efficiency. So I don't necessarily think of this as being additive. I think of this as being part of what it is that we do, and in of itself, it's going to create efficiencies in that. And I think I really encourage that the parts of the organization, whether it's, I know Wyoming has become more active. Washington, actually, in the past week, I'm so happy to see the level of activities that Washington has. Montana clearly needs to be much more active. I look at the Montana QS1 example. That in retrospect, and I take blame for that, because I didn't step in and say, hey, you know what, we need to really leverage our resources properly. I'm sure a lot of those issues could have been avoided. I'm absolutely sure. So if you think about the inefficiencies we created for ourselves, it's nothing compared to the bit of time that it would have taken to have the other parts of the organization help during the transition or during the conversion. Okay, if no one's got anything else, that's all I have. The Wendy, I don't know if you guys have anything on the Xenium side. I don't think there is, right?
Hey, Dan?
Yeah.
Is there a group that Xenium is on for Yammer?
They all, I think, I don't know, Bridget, maybe you can answer if you're on. I think Tana and Alicia, and I think they all have both the Yammer access and obviously Geneva Woods. I think they have Geneva Woods email. So it's a good question. I know that they're not on it, like meaning they're not active on it, but I do think that's a very good point that needs to,
That's crazy.
That's ridiculous.
3 hubs.
And we do that like what, 3 times a year?
Yeah, at least like 20,000 a year.
God, I think it's you. You got to put on mute.
What's everybody else doing?
God, I think it's you. I think so. Anyway, so that's a good point. I think HR. I do think HR can create their own Yammer group, and this is going to be an art. I mean, part of this is, as I said the other day to I think Lynette, in Washington. Part of this is there's a balance between having groups that are too big and having groups that are too small. And I think part of this is we almost need a sort of a Yammer policing to get rid of a bunch of these groups that are not active. I think one of the things that we're doing is we're creating groups. They're not staying active, and then they're staying in there and they're clogging things up. So I think I'd rather see us continuously have a process for calling through these groups that are not being used, so that the ones that do remain are the ones that are actively used by the team, right? I think that would.
Yeah, I think it would have to probably be a private group so that the managers have, a forum to reach out and get answers to questions that we have too.
Which is obviously you can do that. You can create a private group so that no one else can see, and someone in HR can be the administrator that allows people in or not. So.
I think it's awesome.
Okay, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. And like I said, I will, now that we've recorded this, I will put this up on Yammer, actually, this whole presentation, and be able to load it so that your teams can actually not only view the presentation, but they can actually listen to the interaction also. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.